Hi, welcome to this Fix-It Fair video presented by the City of Eugene and the Toolbox Project Tool Lending Library. I'm Paul. I'm a longtime volunteer with the Toolbox and with the Fix-It Fair. In this video, I'll talk about how to identify and correct common problems that occur in typical floor and table lamps similar to this one. I'll start by showing you all the basic parts of a typical lamp. The bulb, of course, then the part that holds the lampshade on is called the harp. Sometimes it comes off just like this. You pull these little rings up and squeeze it and it pulls out. Sometimes the socket has threads on the top and the harp goes on there, so you just unscrew it from the top of the socket to take it off. Then there's the socket, which could be a one-way or a three-way bulb socket, and I'll show you pictures of those in a moment. In the body of the lamp and inside the body is the stem, which is a long piece of threaded small pipe. It goes all the way from here to the top, and that's what holds all these pieces together with a nut on each end. And in the base, there's usually some felt or some kind of padding or feet. If you have to get into this part, if you need to get into this part of the base for rewiring, you'll have to take the felt part off the bottom, just cut it loose and then glue it back after you're finished, or like this one has a hole in the middle and I don't have to do that. Sometimes lamps don't have a stem. If it's a large diameter ceramic or glass lamp, for instance, it might just have a big opening in the bottom and one small piece of pipe at the top, which holds the socket onto the body of the lamp. Probably the most common failure in a lamp is going to be in the socket, either the contacts down inside or the switch or the connections on the bottom. Before you proceed, be sure the lamp is unplugged. Then first inspect the contacts inside the socket. Check to see if they appear to be corroded or burned or just discolored from too much heat. If there's just a little discoloration from heat, or if it's corroded, greenish colored, you can probably clean those up using a small piece of sandpaper down inside. Just rub it around as much as is necessary to get the brass color back. It might be that it's bent downward from too many bulbs being screwed in and then screwed back out. If that's the case, you can reach inside with your fingernail or with some small tool and just pull it upward a little bit, gently so that you don't break it off. Just a little bit so that it makes a more firm contact with the bottom of the bulb. If that's not the problem, the next thing to check is the switch. So put the bulb back in and turn the lamp on and just wiggle the switch around. See if that causes it to flicker or if it causes it to go off and then come back on. If that's the case, then you're probably going to need to replace the socket, and we'll do that in just a moment. If you determine that you do need to replace the socket, I'll show you now how to do that. To begin with, of course, make sure it's unplugged. You need to take the top half, the shell, off the socket to begin with. Somewhere near here, it usually says press here. And if you press there and squeeze the two halves together, sometimes it'll just come right apart. Sometimes it's a little difficult, and if it is, you might need a small screwdriver. Put it in the space between the base and the shell of the socket and just pry it upward a little bit, inward and upward, and that'll pop it off. So once it's disconnected from the base, just pull up on it and take the shell off of the socket itself. The shell, you'll notice, has a cardboard insulator on the inside. If it looks like it's burned, then it's definitely time to replace your socket. Now you loosen the two screws on the socket and just pull the wires right off. When you're replacing the socket, if the new socket is, if the shell of the new socket is just like the old one, then you won't need to replace this part, the base of the socket. If it's different, you might need to replace this part too. It'll all come together. The socket will all come as one unit, these parts all together. To get this off, there's usually a set screw right at the bottom, down here. Loosen that just a little bit and just untwist it. But first, if there's a knot inside here, you'll have to undo that knot. And if the cable, when you undo that knot, is brittle or cracked or crumbles and falls off, you'll need to replace the cord too. Once you've done the knot, just unscrew the socket base, and pull it right off. Inside the base is another piece of paper, cardboard, insulator. If you need to replace the cord because it's old and brittle or cracked or falling apart, then you'll need to start at the bottom, down in here. It comes out the bottom of the stem, then it goes sideways out the side. You usually won't be able to just pull on the side and get it out. It's best to pull out of the stem first, pull straight down, then pull it through the side. So when you replace it, it's just the opposite. It'd probably be a lot easier to get it through the stem if you don't have finished ends like this. So cut it off so it's a clean new end. It'll be a lot easier to get through the stem. Put it through the bottom first. Pull out enough slack. Then start it up through the stem. Now we have to separate the two halves of the zip cord, and it's called zip cord because it just zips apart. Just use your fingernails, or you might need some scissors or something to get it started. Cut right down through the center, being careful not to get into the copper part. Zip it apart about 2 inches or so. Now, before you go any further, it's time to put the base of the socket back on and the cardboard insulator that goes inside the base. I'll tighten the set screw just a little bit to keep it from accidentally coming back off. The next thing we're going to do is tie what's commonly called a UL knot in the end of the cord. That is so that after we attach the socket, if somehow the cord gets pulled from below, it won't pull off of the socket screws because the knot will keep it from going down into the stem. Do that after it's been zipped about 2 inches or so. Bend it around like this so that it looks a little bit like a heart shape. Then put one of these ends through the back and then through the loop on the opposite side and pull it tight, and that is the knot. Now we need to strip the insulation off of the cord about 5/8 of an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch. I use this kind of a tool. There are other kinds of wire strippers. This is a common kind. Find the size that will cut through the insulation but not into the copper. Both of these have multiple sizes, and it will depend upon which kind of zip cord you're using as to which size is the correct one. So cut through the insulation and then pull it offwards. And the other one. Now that the insulation is off, twist the copper strands so that all the small strands become essentially one big strand. Twist it tight all the way to the end. Now we're going to put these onto the screws of the socket. Most lamp cords are not polarized. That is to say, both prongs on the plug are the same width and can fit either way in your receptacle. Modern receptacles have one wide and one narrow slot. And some plugs, polarized plugs, have one wide and one narrow blade. The narrow blade is the hot wire blade. So figure out which is the narrow one. Then trace the cable from one end to the other. Sometimes they're marked with a colored marker, a white stripe or something. Sometimes they have a little ridge or rib that you have a hard time seeing, but you can feel it with your finger. So figure out which of those two is connected to the hot wire on your plug. Then go to the other end and find that same one. That will be the hot wire. That's if you have a polarized plug. Most lamp cords are not polarized, and it doesn't matter which wire goes on which screw. If it is polarized, then the hot wire goes onto the brass colored screw, and the one that's not hot, also called the neutral wire, goes on the silver colored screw. In this case, there's not a polarized plug, so it doesn't matter about that. Put them on the screws, bend a little U shape on the end, something like this, and I'll show you a detailed picture after this part of the video. Put that around the screw. Make sure that the ends are wrapped all the way under the screw and tighten. And do the same thing with the other one. And I'll show detailed pictures of the finished connections as well after this segment of the video. Now that those connections are complete, reach down here and pull the cord back through the stem until the knot is all the way down in the bottom. Then you can pull this loop out through the side. Make sure that the paper or cardboard insulator is inside the shell of the socket. And you push this down into the bottom. And push this over. Turn it so that the switch is 90 degrees from the two connection points of the harp, or whichever direction you prefer, and push it on down until it snaps into the base of the socket. You'll usually hear a little clicking sound as it snaps in. If you do need to replace the plug on the end of the cord, you have a couple of options. One is the kind that requires no tools to install, similar to this. Just put the wire in here, squeeze the prongs together, and slip it into the body. The other kind, and it comes in many different varieties, but it has screws, and you would put the wires under the screws using the same techniques that I showed you for installing the wires onto the socket terminals. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll find this video useful and that you'll be able to restore some life to a family heirloom or your favorite old lamp.